Hey, all you Ethicuties and the 40% of you who have still not subscribed to the Ethicsverse, what's the matter with you? Welcome to the coolest place to be every Thursday at noon Eastern. If you think we can make our world better by making our workplaces better and more ethical. So we're going to dive in today. We got a phenomenal episode for you. We have the FCPA crash course. We're going to give you a guide on how to better understand the DOJ's playbook. We're going to analyze a bunch of different cases that have recently come out, and we're going to talk about 10 top tips on what the DOJ is looking for. So a couple of quick announcements. Please respond here with some, if you guys can drop that into the chat, the link for the survey. We'd love to get some more survey responses. I say this every week. We take very seriously the hour you spend with us, and we want this to be wildly valuable. We hate thinly veiled sales presentations. We want you to walk away every single week with a shot in the arm, some excitement, and some new frameworks that you can perhaps put into place immediately. So share with us what you like, what you don't like, ideas for topics in the future, and we're going to continue to build the Ethicsverse into what's going to serve us best. Keep those emojis coming. We're at 200 so far. We got to really impress Tom Fox today, the voice of compliance, and give him a taste of what the Ethicsverse has turned into. I want to share a couple things with you right now. We're going to be giving away books, of course. There's so much great thought leadership coming out, so much great content out there. I encourage you to check these things out. Of course, the Compliance Podcast Network. You can really kind of roll the dice, pick any one of those podcasts on there that Tom does, and you're going to get some good information. You're going to get some good nuggets, some great perspective. So if you're not listening to those, check it out. One I would absolutely recommend is the Two Gurus Talk Compliance. It's Tom Fox with Christy Grant Hart, who is a friend of the show, friend of the family, and also the Great Women in Compliance podcast, week by week, keeps ripping out fire. Check those things out. Here's a little link to check out the books that we offer in the Ethico or in the Ethicsverse library, and we can go from there. The FCPA Survival Guide is out. Me and Tom did a 10-part series that you can find on YouTube, and we also have the book. So we're going to be giving away 5 copies of this book today for those who are most active in the chat, as always, those adding the most value, and so forth. So go ahead and drop those things in the chat. Oh, we're up to 500. Thank you so much. Who needs lunch with all these emojis? I love it. Let's start talking about Ethicsverse Day. So 7 days from now, Ethicsverse Day, the coolest event in the history of ethics and compliance and human resource, is kicking off. Ethicsverse Day is going to be phenomenal. It is $250 to get in, but if you use the promo code EV24, you can get in for free because we love you. So hit that promo code. And also, there's going to be a ton of prizes. You guys are going to absolutely love Ethicsverse Day. We have 3 amazing sessions. We're talking about AI, actual AI comprehensive governance frameworks that, can be a guide for what you put into place in your organization, career advancement techniques from some of the best mentors in the space, the best career coaches in the space. And then we're going to be having a session with Kenneth Polite, Hui Chen, and Andrew McBride, where we're really going to be talking about how do we deal best with regulators. So it's going to be a packed day. If you go to my LinkedIn page, my most recent post is a post about Ethicsverse Day. If you reshare that post, you're going to be entered into a drawing for an Ethicsverse Day prize pack. So who loves you? We're going to give you a cool unreleased hoodie and a book and some other cool stuff. So go ahead and go to my page. Follow me if you don't follow me. Reshare that post to be entered into that drawing. Our ecosystem is live in effect. We are gaining a lot of traction with it because guess what? The software tail should not wag the ethics and compliance program dog. We need next gen tools to do our jobs most effectively. And magically, once we get a next gen tool that's flexible and does creates leverage for us, it's amazing the type of impact that folks can have. So if you're interested in learning about what's out there, if you have a contract that's expiring the next 18 months, hit us up and just see what we got. Classic no pitch zone Ethico, overview demo of our tool. FCPA Survival Guide, as I said, we're going to we're giving away 5 of those today. So if you have not picked this up, I encourage you to do it. Hit this QR code and go to the Amazon page and you can download the book. And then also I want to mention that Tom has just put out, it's the 5th edition, right, Tom?
Yes, of the Compliance Handbook.
Yeah, so we're going to drop into the chat a link for the Compliance Handbook, the 5th edition. It's phenomenal. Any of the Ethicsverse listeners, if you don't have this, you must not be serious about your career, okay? So any of Ethicsverse listeners can hit that link and get a 20% discount. Well worth the investment, okay? So we're giving away 5 of the FCPA Survival Guide, and I'm Nick, your new futuristic knight. We're kind of moving into a knight's phase now, okay? And this is the one and only Tom Fox. He is the voice of compliance. Tom is everywhere. He's someone I've learned so much from. If you don't know him, you're going to love him after this. If you do know him, I'm sure you're dropping 1,000 emojis right now to welcome him. Tom, how's it going?
It's going great, Nick. Happy to be in the Ethicsverse.
Yeah, glad you're here, man. All right, so let's jump into our agenda. First, we're going to give an introduction to these various FCPA cases. We're going to give an overview of these, enforcements. We're going to talk about the top 10 lessons, which is going to be great. These are going to be a detailed analysis of the takeaways from some of these recent cases, and then we're going to give you some overall takeaways from some DOJ speeches if we have time. So we have a packed hour. We're going to dive right in right now. Keep those Q&As coming. Keep those questions coming during the chat. We want to keep this organic as always. So drop those things in the chat. And like we always say, your network is your network. So take advantage of this thing. This greatest asset we have is each other. It's this community that we're all a part of. So connect with each other, build that network, and let's continue to sharpen each other as we make our workplaces better. Okay, let's talk about this timeline, Tom. You talk about 4 different cases in the book. We talk about ABB, Albemarle, SAP, and Gunvor. So let's talk first about ABB. High level, they were a third-time offender that avoided a monitor through extensive remediation.
So absolutely, a couple of keys, big picture keys, Nick. First of all, this is 15 months of cases. And as I read through these and sort of analyzed them, I began to see patterns that the Department of Justice was putting into, or facts that they were putting into the resolution documents. It was clear to me the DOJ was communicating directly to us their expectations. And it doesn't get any better than that for the compliance professional. So I wrote a book around what I thought were the top 10 things. And then, of course, that's the FCPA Survival Guide book. But then you and I have done a podcast series on it where we took a little bit deeper dive. But you're right, it all started with ABB. And it was the first 3-time FCPA recidivist. Yet they, in my opinion, received a relatively low fine and penalty and no corporate monitor. Many of us scratched our heads to ask why. Well, the DOJ communicated to us why. And that was absolutely critical in the start of this. They had a bribery scheme literally up to the corporate office in Switzerland, yet only had a $350 million fine. And I know we'll go into sort of the deep dive of what they did, but kudos to ABB, Natalia Shaheda, and her compliance dream team really put together a fabulous remediation package, extensively cooperated with the Department of Justice. All of that was reported right up front in the settlement document. So lots of lessons from ABB. Albemarle, this one also was incredibly interesting for a couple of different reasons, Nick. It was the first time the Department of Justice called out a data analytics solution as part of a remediation. And we learned the importance of data analytics. Perhaps before we even learned that was there's self-disclosure, and then there's self-disclosure, and then there's timely self-disclosure. And we learned timely self-disclosure from this case. Albemarle internally discovered potential violations, and it moved forward to investigate it themselves and did not timely disclose or promptly in the DOJ parlance. But even without that, or failure to timely disclose or failure to promptly disclose, they had a huge comeback. Part of that was around data analytics, and part of that was a change in their external sales structure, which we'll talk about also at some length. Nick, SAP, a 2-time recidivist, bribery in 7 countries. If there is a more ubiquitous company in the corporate world, it's not very high above SAP, obviously, because they're the most ubiquitous ERP system across the globe. And so they were literally in a world of hurt with their bribery and corruption schemes. They're, I think, doing business in 150 countries. So they have a huge outreach. And so the question became, how did they sustain such a relatively low fine and penalty and no corporate monitor? Once again, we're going to point to their extensive remediation efforts. The DOJ for the second time called out the data analytics implementation. This was a clear message the DOJ wanted to send, and they did. We'll couple that with a couple of speeches that intersperse these, but huge victory for SAP and huge lessons learned for the compliance professional. And our four-pack ends with Gunvor, a Swiss trading company, which was the last of a series of cases of an industry sweep in the trading industry, energy trading. No self-disclosure. We're going to talk extensively about that throughout this. So an enhanced fine and penalty, yet far below what it could have been. It could have clearly been a $1 billion plus case. So great cooperation and remediation efforts by Gunvor. Sort of after they figured out they had to really change the way they were dealing with the Department of Justice. So significant, both in terms of the last of four major trading cases, and significant in terms of this quartet of cases in which the DOJ has communicated directly to us its expectations of what you need to do if you find yourself in an enforcement action.
I love this book, not only because it makes me sound a little bit smarter, but I mean, there's so many, you really did distill out these lessons from the DOJ, from these cases, with respect to how they're going to scrutinize things and what folks can do to increase their odds of having a positive outcome. So, I just love that this is not so theoretical. There's great examples out there, and your ability to pull out those lessons is phenomenal. So buckle up, everybody. Here we go. We're going to start diving into these 10 lessons. So the first lesson here, Tom, that you underscored was self-disclosure. And so talk to us a little bit about self-disclosure and where we saw that work well across these quartet of cases, and where folks kind of fell a little bit short.
So let me just say self-disclosure, underline, 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 triple underline, 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 quadruple underline, underline, underline. It all turns on self-disclosure. And there's no better way to talk about that than ABB. And the reason is ABB didn't self-disclose. But the DOJ spent what you and I might call, or used to say, a lot of ink talking about how ABB actually had called up the Department of Justice, had scheduled a time to come in and self-disclose. Between the time of that phone call to schedule the appointment and the meeting, the South African press broke the story of ABB's bribery and corruption in South Africa. So ABB did not get or did not receive self-disclosure credit. But the DOJ spent 2 or 3 paragraphs laying out in great detail what I just gave you, Nick. And it was clear that the Department of Justice was impressed by this. So in addition to the need for self-disclosure and why the DOJ values that above all, you see that self-disclosure begins the steps for comebacks, because it gives you credibility. And even though ABB did not meet the formal definition of self-disclosure, it did receive kind of internal credibility credit, or internal, it showed a change in something to the Department of Justice. So you cannot really discount that. All of ours, I mentioned, Nick, had discovered an internal violation, but they waited about 18 months before they self-disclosed, and the DOJ said, well, that's not timely. So we learned that timely self-disclosure is critical, and why all of that at the end of the day is so important is by self-disclosure, a company can be eligible for a full declination, meaning 100% discount, or to have your overall fines and penalties reduced by 75%. So the DOJ rewards self-disclosure above all every time a DOJ representative speaks. And the speeches I cited in the book, they reiterated self-disclosure above all.
I mean, it's, to your point, it signals so much. And I think the ABB case is an interesting example because it illustrates this concept, this sort of principle-based concept that I think a lot of folks might struggle with. We don't have a full articulation of how the DOJ is going to handle themselves and comport themselves in every single situation, right? They have a spirit that they're trying to apply, and they're trying to convey through the guidance and through, how they end up interacting with these cases. And I think the ABB thing is great because they didn't they technically were not the ones to kind of tip the DOJ off about it, but to your point, Tom, they got credit for their intention to self-disclose. And again, I think, if we can put ourselves in the DOJ shoes, like in any particular case, what's their goal? Their goal is to remediate this issue and pull the, evaporate out whatever corruption or whatever wrongdoing or low integrity, elements are a part of that culture. They know that in order for that to happen, they need true sort of authentic engagement from the people at the company. And, Tom, to your point, when we raise our hand and say, hey, there's a problem over here, that demonstrates that performance, so to speak, demonstrates our commitment to solving that problem above sort of self-preservation. And I think that authentic conveyance gets a lot of credit in that, and the DOJ has shown that that's what they're looking for.
Well said, Nick.
So we talked a little bit about this. I just kind of jumped the gun here. I hopefully didn't jump the shark though. Okay. So like I just mentioned, they recognized the intent to disclose, and it resulted in more favorable treatment. They formed their opinion. From my understanding and from the conversations I've had, they formed their opinion, based on what those interactions are like and what they're reading from their counterparts within the organization. And I think, if you can show your heart that, if you can show an authentic drive to kind of remediate whatever the issue is, they're going to see that, they're going to notice it, and you're going to get some credit for that. I want to dive into the Albemarle one because this, really kind of underscored that timely disclosure piece. So we talked about it came a little bit later, but they were still able to receive credit. In your opinion, and I know this is not perhaps a fact, how big of a contributing factor was this to, where they ended up? Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, they ended up in a great spot. They were, they won Program of the Year based on how they landed that plane, and they were able to win that in spite of the, non-timely disclosure. How do you think they were able to get to that? Sure.
So I would like people to think about any interactions with the DOJ obviously do not occur in a vacuum. And it's a series of interactions, and it's a series of relationship building. And Albemarle did meet technically the self-disclosure, but not timely. But with ABB, it doesn't stop there. You have to continue that momentum. You have to continue to meet the DOJ expectations. You have to continue your internal remediation and your extraordinary cooperation. And by doing so, you put yourself in a position where when you sit across from the Department of Justice and they say, okay, or you say, we've done this, and they say, okay, show us. What's the data show? And you show that data, you have built a relationship of trust. And
right.
That allows the Department of Justice to move to some of these greater discounts because they feel like companies have earned them, and the companies will implement them going forward and not be yet another recidivist or bad corporate actor. So you have to really think about all of this much more holistically than perhaps you had. And each step brings credibility and a building of a trust relationship between both parties.
So I think as we're talking through this and we're thinking through this, for me, I think it's helpful to, this is going to sound stupid, but to just remember that there's human beings on the other side. And so how would a human being get to the conclusion? They're going to be taking in a bunch of different data, and they're going to be looking at objective data and subjective data and all those kinds of things. And so if we can remember that we're dealing with other human beings, and on a macro level, this is really all about a trust building exercise, then a lot of what Tom just said should make a lot of sense. They're looking for these clues to say, like, are they kind of BSing me, or are they authentically engaging? And that's going to come through a lot of interactions, and setting yourself up for success is, the name of the game. So let's talk about the need for speed, Tom. So what's this lesson all about?
So the need for speed, for those old enough to remember Animal House, it's akin to double secret probation, meaning you know it when you see it, or you know it when you're told you've been in it. And this is a very perplexing one, because what the Department of Justice has said, that there is extraordinary cooperation, then there's double extra secret extraordinary cooperation. And their definition of that, we know it when we see it. Well, that is sometimes difficult. And if you're a lawyer, you're probably close to pulling your hair out. But even though all of that is true, ABB received significant credit for this need for speed. And what it is real-time sharing of facts. Now, interestingly, this comes to us from the Securities and Exchange Commission, order involving ABB. They were a part of the settlement as well. And the SEC said that ABB's counsel turned over documents literally in real time. So that means when you discover a document, you pick up the phone and you call the regulators. When you're sitting across from someone in an interview and you find out information, you pick up the phone and call the regulators. Obviously, there has to be a willingness to be fully transparent. And the second part of that phrase, Nick, that you have put in front of us, regardless of consequences. Because as a lawyer, I really want, if I get a new document or I get new information, I want to share that with my client. I want to say, how does this impact our overall case? How does it impact our overall strategy? Does it impact our remediation in any way? At this point, we can see, well, the Department of Justice says, no, you got to call us. And I find that disconcerting at best, but ABB did that and they got credit for it. And once again, I will go back to Kenneth Polite, who literally said, what is it? We know it when we see it. Well, there you go. And if you're going to hold documents for some period of time, you're not going to receive this additional credit for double extra secret, extraordinary cooperation.
So, I mean, there's a reason that we're talking about this. There's a reason that, you know, they have to kind of underscore this and draw this distinction between, you know, extraordinary cooperation versus just cooperation. This sentence here of being fully transparent regardless of consequence, that's, I mean, you know, in theory, that's like, yeah, just do that. I think in practice, that's kind of a nerve-wracking thing. Like, what guidance would you give, or like, what framework could somebody present to the legal team or to the board or whatever in a situation like this to get them more comfortable in taking advantage of, you know, this opportunity to get a massive reduction, the cost of which being, you know, fully detrowed, you know what I'm saying, in front of the DOJ.
So one of the key themes from this entire series of takeaways, Nick, that I wanted to highlight at the end is this drives the importance of your internal investigation protocol, and for those who may be outside counsel listening to this, your role in doing an investigation. Everything you and I learned 15 years ago is more true now, or even more true now. And it's become even more important now. And what this means is, Nick, is you have to have a system set up in place that you can quickly and efficiently transmit information internally. Because if you get a document, if you find a document, or you get a piece of information in an interview, you have to tell your client. But that call to the client, the call to the DOJ may literally be 15 or 30 minutes later. So you have to be able to get the information, evaluate it quickly, get it to the decision makers internally in the company, and you have to be ready, willing, and able to turn that over. So you're going to have a very strong investigative protocol in place, both internally for information that comes in for those who are going to need it within the company, but also for your external counsel. So if you're a law firm with multiple associates across the globe, something comes up, they're going to have to be able to coordinate with a team lead or liaise with the appropriate person running the investigation, who's going to have to make a very quick decision on how do we use this document and how do we quickly turn it over to the Department of Justice. So it's going to put even more pressure on the investigative protocols, internal and external as well.
So we got a great question from Robin. Hey, Robin, how's it going? She said, is there a range of time that defines swift disclosure?
The DOJ has not given us any range of time that would disclose that. So
I have the answer.
Okay.
ASAP. That's the answer. You got to get it as fast as possible. And I would just say, Tom, like, this is a persuasion game. So if they can't define what super fast is versus fast, well, then we have to create the circumstances to where they are going to say, oh, this is super fast. And so That's a game of anchoring. That's a game of framing to say, I want to get the outcome that ABB got. I want you to think of us as even faster than them. My goal is to remediate this thing. As I find stuff, I'm going to be sending it over. I think if you can frame that and anchor them to that versus crossing your fingers and hoping that the amalgamation of all your actions over the 6 to 18 month investigation and remediation process, that all that comes together and they say, wow, these guys are phenomenal. I think you got to set yourself up for success early. Yeah. So, all right, let's talk about lesson 3. Great question, Robin. Thanks for asking that. So lesson 3 is all about extensive remediation. Some of these words we've heard in the preamble in our introduction of some of these cases, but when we're talking about extensive remediation, what's the kind of crux of this, Tom?
So this is really an entire revamp of not only your compliance program, or not only the issue which gave rise to the FCPA violation, but your compliance program as well. So well-documented data analytics, I think we're going to talk about that separately. It's a huge component of your extensive remediation, and documenting everything you have done to bring your program up to literally best in class, not just best practices or something like that, but you're going to have to show best in class, because what you're trying to do is to demonstrate to the Department of Justice you're serious, but you have a program in place, and at the end of the day, you tested it, and that's going to get you out of a monitorship. So extensive remediation is going to be a critical step.
Let's talk about SAP, because I think they were a good example of this. This is who was kind of held up as the best example of this. So let's walk through kind of what they did.
Right. So we're going to skip root cause analysis, because that's going to be a separate point that I want to talk about separately, Nick. But SAP, as I mentioned, one of the most ubiquitous corporate citizens across the world. They're in over 150 countries, and they completely revamped their compliance program. They increased budget, they increased personnel, they increased authority, they realigned to give direct reporting from literally the compliance front lines, first line of defense, all the way up to the corporate office in Germany. And they put all of this in place during the middle of their FCPA investigation and enforcement action. And this is what the department really wants to see. And SAP took this opportunity, and companies really need to understand, Nick, this is an opportunity to completely revamp your program and put in literally best in class. And I think SAP is one of the best examples of that. And certainly of these 4 cases I talk about in the book, or we talk about in the book, it is right up there.
So this is speculation, but who do you think drove that? Who do you think at SAP was like, we need to make this best in class? You think that was a collective decision by a board of directors that instructed the compliance team or whoever, or the legal team, to remediate it? Or do you think that was a little bit more bottom up, and it was an opportunity that somebody took, one of those teams took, in order to fix the problems in the program that they, I'm sure, knew about or had concerns about?
Nick, I think SAP looked at this situation similar to how ABB looked at it, which was, we've had a prior FCP enforcement action. Oh my God, what is the culture of our organization? Right. What is the compliance program or our organization? How could we do this now after having had an enforcement action? And if you maybe take it a step further, Nick, I don't know if you guys use SAP or you've ever worked with SAP, but I have. And SAP is a part of a compliance solution. And so SAP itself, as a part of their overall ERP tool, has compliance components. And I think they realized, if we're going to lead the sales effort around compliance as a part of our ERP solution, we have to have best in class. And I think it literally started with the board or the top management that we have a problem. We are a recidivist. We have done something wrong after having supposedly looked at ourselves once before and said, we'll never do it again. And they made the decision to go for it.
Okay. Yeah, they kind of took that true look in the mirror and said, we got to do something here. This can't keep happening. So Doug had a question. Hey, Doug, great question. Great analogy also, by the way, up above. So he said, you discussed turning documents over. What about info obtained from conversations? This was from the last section, I think.
Absolutely. Info obtained from conversations, information obtained from interviews, oral information that you may write down, whatever it may be, turn it over.
All right, root cause analysis. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this before, but if you haven't, wait till you learn about this thing. All right, what's going on with root cause analysis, Tom?
So a root cause analysis is different from an investigation. A root cause analysis is designed to determine why something happened, not whether it happened or not. It's not there to assess blame. It's there to figure out why. And the Department of Justice has talked about root cause analysis literally since the 2012 FCPA resource guide. But what they said in the SAP enforcement action was that your risk assessment flows from your root cause analysis. So I typically ask people to think about a process where you have a risk assessment or risk management strategy based upon the assessment of your risk, train on that strategy, monitor your implementation, and improve as appropriate. Well, now you need to add an extra step if you find yourself in an investigation. You need to do a root cause analysis to figure out what's the true root cause of what we did, and then from there move to your risk assessment. And in the enforcement action, the DOJ clearly as they could have stated that it doesn't start with a risk assessment, it starts with a root cause analysis. And SAP did that root cause analysis, which informed their risk assessment, and it identified the areas of weaknesses or failures so that remedial actions could be tailored to address specific issues found in the root cause analysis, not just manage a risk that you or I might determine.
So maybe this is a little dumb of me, but you have to have something, like to do a root cause analysis, you have to do it on something. So that's something, is that you think like the risks that have popped out of your risk assessment, or is the practice for somebody who's not in, trouble right now, who wants to start building some of these practices, these best practices, or which will soon become sort of table stakes expectations, to start building that in? How could they do that? Would it be looking at their biggest risks on their current risk assessment and saying like, okay, we need to kind of do some root cause analysis to see if we're really just solving the symptom instead of solving the problem? Like, how do we take action on it?
So a root cause analysis, another way to think about it is the 5 why question. Why? Why did something happen? If you had a failure, why did that failure happen? If you've had an FCP investigation, you've had a failure. Your program's been pressure tested and found wanting. Why did that happen? You can certainly do a root cause analysis. If you don't have a failure, though, you might uncover weaknesses, and it's certainly of value, but it really comes to the fore after you've had a failure, because you have to determine why you did have that failure.
Yeah, I think this is like a posture. This is like a mentality. Like, we need to always be kind of asking those 5 whys just naturally to kind of get down to that root, because like we just run so many risks every day in solving symptoms instead of solving problems. And until you ask those 5 whys and get down to the bottom, there's a decent chance that your efforts are not going to actually, uproot this issue. Quick question from Aaron. Thanks for this question, Aaron. How often do you think comprehensive training should take place with senior leadership? Would yearly be sufficient? Any opinions on that?
So leaders need a couple of different types of training. One is they need the general training. Hopefully by this point in their career, they're somewhat familiar with that. But remember, the DOJ talks to us about targeted training. Well, that means targeted to senior leadership. What is their role? If you're going to ask them to be the leaders of compliance and the leaders of ethics and the leaders of culture, then you need to train them on, well, how do they do that? Do they have a culture moment? Do they have an ethics moment? Do they talk about doing business ethically and in compliance? Do they highlight people who receive part of their bonus from doing ethically in compliance? Do they celebrate ethical victories? Do they talk about business we didn't do because we couldn't assure ourselves that our third-party partners were as committed to ethics and doing business ethically and in compliance as we were? So give targeted training for what you want of your senior leadership. If they're in roles that are technical roles like a CFO or some other role, IT, perhaps they need technical training as a gatekeeper. If you're going to ask them to look at a transaction, You need to explain the parameters of what they need to look at if it's outside of what typically a CFO would look at. So give them targeted training. They are a part of your compliance solution, just like everyone else.
I like what you said there. I mean, I think we need to start with a question of like, well, like to what end? What's the point of training them? Is it just so that they're better informed? No, I think it's probably so that they act in a different way. So I think kind of painting that picture of how you want them to act and helping get them to that might be a little bit better than sort of putting all of our hope in some training that they might not engage with or they might not want to take because, you know, like as somebody just said in the chat, many times boards don't want to take that kind of mandatory training. Okay, so let's wrap up 4 here with Albemarle because I think they have a great example of how they applied this root cause analysis principle.
Right. So they were given huge credit, and rightly so, for the elimination of sales agents throughout the company. So they moved to a different sales model, which was internal based. Now, obviously, that has its own risks, but you eliminate one category of risk if you get rid of your third-party sales. And this is a huge exercise. But Nick, I think back to something a chief compliance officer told me years ago in Houston. And his company had a large number of agents, and they were winnowing that down. And he said, when I talk to the business people, I say, look, you don't want someone between you and your customer. You want a direct relationship with your customer. So it's in your business interest to have that relationship. And it's in your business interest to have a direct sales as opposed to a third-party agent. So there's a real business justification for having a direct sales model. And Albemarle did this, and it was a huge undertaking, but it was specifically called out by the Department of Justice.
I mean, I just can't underscore enough like how big of an undertaking that is to change your entire business model. It's not like 5% of the revenue came through these agents. You know what I'm saying? It was a significant portion of revenue. And that commitment, I think, speaks volumes because everyone knows what a massive change can do to a business. That increases risk. We know what that does to stock prices. We know what that does in the marketplace. And, you know, again, what a demonstration of their commitment to actually remediate the issue. And, you know, they got the benefit for that. All right, let's jump into number 5. Data analytics. You guys ever heard of this? You're going to love this one. Let's talk through data analytics and the importance of it. You know, it's been sort of floating around, and then now we got an underscored, you know, double bolded, double underlined example here on how the use of data analytics was able to persuade the DOJ to, you know, land in a better spot for the company.
So this is critical. You're absolutely right. The DOJ has been talking about it since at least late 2021 or 2022, and now we have multiple FCPA enforcement actions. Albemarle specifically called out for utilizing data analytics. SAP specifically called out for using data analytics. ABB implemented a huge data analytics program as a part of their overall solution. This is not best practice. This is not middle of the road. This is table stakes now. And frankly, Nick, from the business perspective, if you're not using data analytics to help you do pattern recognition in a wide variety of areas, simply are as straightforward from fraud risk analysis to your sales analysis to determine where your sales may be efficient or inefficient, you are way behind the 8 ball. And the work done by at AB InBev and their team initially several years ago, kind of developing the first compliance in-house data analytics capability is something that they showed because they were very open about it and talked about it publicly, that they expanded out to 15 or 20 modules. It became a very high, not simply profit center, but way for the business to use data in new and different ways to make the business run more efficiently and, at the end of the day, more profitably.
So let's dive into Albemarle because they had some great examples as well. That the AB InBev is such a cool story. But again, it's like it's solving for outcome. Like the DOJ is holding this up as an example, not because they satisfied the DOJ, is because that organization, just like Albemarle, authentically were trying to solve for outcome and trying to actually get to the bottom of the issue. That data analytics program at AB InBev was not to satisfy the DOJ. It was to satisfy themselves that they could have an effective program and that things were moving in the right direction. So I love, though, the Albemarle case, because this was the first FCP settlement to explicitly mention data analytics use, and it set this new standard for tech integration. Like you said at the start of the section, Tom, this stuff is becoming table stakes. But I wonder if there's a gap between what people think the DOJ means by data analytics and what they actually mean about data analytics.
I don't think there's a gap, Nick. I think the gap is the underutilization of data analytics by compliance practitioners to date. And you can obviously track key compliance indicators, KPIs. You and I have been talking about that for years. What are they? How do you track it? But the ability to see a much broader picture, whether you call it patterns and raked leaves, whether you talk about simply anomalies above A or below A or above Z, however you set your parameters, if something is outside the norm, data analytics can pick that up, and you can, if it's a sales side, perhaps it's a FCPA violation, you move to investigate and remediate. But it can be things like, well, what's the training indicia from one region? What about hotline calls from one region? What about communications we're getting back from a region? Are there specific questions or specific topics that people are asking questions about? Conversely, are there no questions? What does that mean? So when you begin to see those sorts of information, or something as if you want to look at the spend of gift, travel, and entertainment by employees in one region to see if they've met the compliance requirements, and it turns out that the spend is not only wildly different between individuals, no surprise there, but it's wildly different between customers. Why is that? Is it because some customers like to be entertained? Is it because some customers are taking advantage, or is it some nefarious reason?
Right. So, we're only halfway through this thing. This has been phenomenal. We could stop right now and you guys could chew on this for the rest of the day. But let's dive into clawbacks and holdbacks. I kind of love this one because I'm such an incentives guy. But walk us through this, the lesson here, lesson 6.
Sure, Nick. So, you and Gio have been talking about incentives since I've known you. But this is a little different focus because it's not just incentives, it's consequence management, as the Department of Justice calls it. But it's in the specific form of holding back any discretionary bonus payment may be owed someone who's involved in bribery and corruption, who's overseen people who were involved in it or should have been on the watch for it and didn't, or attempting to claw back bonuses that have been previously paid. And Albemarle got a huge credit for this, some $760,000, I believe, plus for it. And SAP did as well. And the Department of Justice really wants to emphasize this. And we've noted up here the pilot program the DOJ put in place to give a dollar for dollar credit. And I think it was SAP was not always successful in clawing money back, but the DOJ gave them credit for that, and they gave them credit for the money they spent in court cases. So this is something that is extremely important to the Department of Justice. They are emphasizing it. They were giving dollar for dollar credits on not only what you may get back, but also what you may spend. So but the number for Albemarle is just outstanding. It's almost $1 million. Yeah. So that's a huge savings for Albemarle, not as much for SAP. But once again, the DOJ gave them credit for monies they had spent. So clawbacks and holdbacks are something you have to do now. It is well within your interest to do so, and you're going to get dollar for dollar credit, and it doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah, and again, it just seems like the DOJ is really trying to show what they care about, and they're really trying to demonstrate that they're trying to reward authentic commitment to rooting out these issues. And so dollar for dollar credit, again, underscoring this, it's not just the dollars you get back, it's the dollars that you spend in order to try to get those dollars back as well. Very good. Okay, let's talk about changing business models. This one was really, for me, the biggest mind-blowing one, just because of the undertaking that this can be for an organization, and the demonstrated like reprioritization of what's important for their business can be staggering in some of these examples. So let's talk about changing business models and the message that sends.
Sure, and I would also throw in addition to Albemarle, which we talked about extensively in this arena, Gunvor was given credit for this as well, moving away from a third-party business generation model. It is a shifting of the biggest risk in every company and every compliance program, which are third parties. So obviously there are risks involved with an internal sales model, but there are a different risks and risks that hopefully you can manage. So by making these changes, once again, Nick, you see a theme here of companies who have self-disclosed, cooperated extensively remediated, and done steps like a root cause analysis, engaged in or utilized rather data analytics and then clawbacks and holdbacks. And this is one more step that they are demonstrating to the Department of Justice their commitment to move to a truly best-in-class program. And so I'm going to say again what you said, I think 3 times. The difficulty in doing this cannot be overstated, but it shows a commitment to trying to move away from a model that puts your business at risk.
That last sentence you said is, so important. And again, I think it just sends a message. Like if you had a triple bypass surgery and your doctor is like, you really got to change your diet, and all you do is start walking, but you continue to eat the fast food every day and you continue to drink beers all the time, that doesn't really show a true commitment to like getting healthy. But if on the other hand, you cut it all out and you're totally committed to it, you've cut out the fast food and all that kind of stuff, that kind of extensive remediation sends a much different message to your doctor. And again, it's a willingness to solve for the outcome that's most important versus kind of paying lip service to it. So we kind of talked about this a little bit, but eliminating these third parties with SAP, I just can't. I mean, just imagine that undertaking to essentially totally remove an entire sales channel and replace that with your own people. That is a wildly extensive project. That's extremely expensive, time-consuming, difficult project to do. And again, it helped to show that they were committed to, not having another, not being a recidivist once again. What else would you add to that, Tom?
So it is certainly a work in progress, Nick, and this is where your ongoing remediation is going to be critical, because the Department of Justice is going to say, fine, yes, you've told us that, show us the data and show the steps you've taken. You may not be in a position yet where you can actually talk about sales, but it's one more step to build credibility and one more opportunity to build credibility with the DOJ.
Right. Okay, this next one's good. Enhancing compliance programs. So why don't you walk us through this this lesson, Tom, and kind of talk about what they are, what they're objectively looking for as evidence for this enhanced program.
Sure. So it's going to be things that we have all heard about, we've all talked about, and but it's doing it in a transparent way that is meaningful. So increased budget and increased resources. Did you get the budget you needed? Did you get the head count you needed? You approved mechanisms for identifying issues and then escalating and addressing potential violations. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then extensive training. And it's not just don't be bad, don't, sell illegally. It's really targeted training to help companies and help employees do business ethically and in compliance. And it's showing a commitment to that with data analytics. In terms of your compliance team, it's putting together a top team. I'm going to go back to ABB and Natalia Shaheda. Natalia has been in the compliance space for 20 years, or at least 15 years. Well, she was part of a dream team at a company called Weatherford who had a horrible FCPA violation. Well, she took that experience as a part of a great group run by Billy Jacobson. Well, now she's got her own dream team. And she's brought in top compliance professionals in data analytics and a wide variety of other compliance specialties to help run that program. Well, that gets the DOJ's attention. When you get people who are well known or have been trained under people who are well known, that shows a level of commitment, and that bringing in the number of people to do the work is going to be absolutely critical throughout the process. Once again, documented, and once again with data.
And again, like you just said, it shows that commitment. And in some cases, like the one you just mentioned, that person was a known quantity to some degree, right? Like that other case is a known case inside the DOJ. You know what I'm saying? So that known quantity thing, again, this is, of course we have to remediate this stuff, but we also have to convey that we're actually trying to remediate it. And there's a lot of persuasive power in what Tom just talked about. So let's walk through ABB, because you kind of talked a little bit about some of this, but let's close the loop on this one before we get to 9.
Sure. So remember, what you got to do at the end of the day in this process is put an effective program in place and test that. So it is your ongoing assessment of your compliance program effectiveness. So it's really a 2-step process, Nick. Put the program in place and then test or assess that program. So it's going to require a lot of focused work, but that's your goal at the end of the day. And if you can demonstrate to the Department of Justice, you put a program in place and you've tested the effectiveness and you've demonstrated the testing of that effectiveness to them, then you can avoid a monitorship. And that's really where you want to go with all this. And this is what ABB did, as well as anyone throughout this process.
So, hey, Terry, how's it going? Great question from Terry. So, all right, here we go. What about those businesses? I think this was for the last section, maybe. What about those businesses where it is integral to their business model to sell using channel partners and so forth? What do those businesses need to do to show that they are managing the level of risk?
Channel partners. What's that another name for? Third parties.
Exactly.
And a business model used in several different types of industries, certainly across the United States. You have to manage that channel partner risk. You have to identify the channel partners who are doing business in high-risk jurisdictions or with high-risk customers. You have to give them targeted training. It doesn't stop there, though. So I tell people, it's when you sign a contract with a third-party agent, that's when the work starts.
That's
because
right.
You have to manage that relationship. And the same with channel partners. You have to manage that relationship. You have to do additional monitoring of them, do additional monitoring. If you have to audit them on a biennial basis, do it. If it's high risk, then you need to manage that risk. I recognize it's a key component of many sales strategies, but simply because something's high risk doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means
Correct.
your risk management strategy must be higher.
Yeah, and it has to be compelling. It has to be a compelling strategy. Okay, so internal controls, everyone's best friend. Let's talk through what they're looking for and what guidance they've provided for this lesson.
When has the last time you did a gap analysis on your internal controls? Because if you've got an FCPA violation, you've had an internal control failure. So you know that. So number one, do a gap analysis. Determine any gaps that are present. Whether you map those gaps to the 10 hallmarks or rather a hallmarks of an effective compliance program, best practices under the OECD, UK Bribery Act, whatever it may be, then promptly remediate those weaknesses. And I'm sort of starting at the bottom and going up, Nick, but then it's continuous testing. It's literally, we had, I teach a class at Case Western this summer, and we had a woman who was in internal controls at Walmart during their journey. And she said literally they met on a quarterly basis to go over region-specific controls they put in place. 1, to see if they were effective, 2, to see if they needed tweaking, and 3, to see were these not simply effective for the issue we thought we were dealing with, but also they are effective for the business. So you can review internal controls just like you would a policy and procedure, literally on a quarterly basis. So if you're in that sort of situation, continuous testing and monitoring of the controls, at least for some period of time, to determine their overall effectiveness.
Yeah, I mean, very rarely is your control apparatus going to be a set it and forget it kind of a thing. Like you're going to put some things in place and some pieces are going to work, some pieces are not. You're going to have to tweak that. And I think to your point, getting that flywheel of checking and making sure that it's working and taking some action if it's not working not only demonstrates that like, okay, we're actually trying to fix these internal controls, but it's also going to help you develop a better internal control apparatus that's going to be more anti-fragile. So let's talk about SAP because I think they did some nice jobs with, or they did a nice job with on the internal controls front.
Right. So as I mentioned a couple of times, SAP is in over 150 countries. And so the breadth and scope of what they do on a business basis, you're going to have robust controls focusing on those in high-risk areas or regions or high-risk customers. Now, many of SAP customers are private corporations, so that's not going to be FCPA high risk. But if it's a governmental entity or a government itself, obviously that's a high risk, or if it's a high-risk jurisdiction. So SAP identified the weaknesses in their control framework literally across the globe and went in and remediated that, tested it, and presented that information of their ongoing monitoring to the Department of Justice in their review process. And it really helped SAP avoid a monitor.
Quick question. Maria said, great presentation, lots of great info. Tom, you're amazing. I just added that, but that's for me, Tom. Lesson 8, can you please elaborate more on the Weatherford comment and please repeat the name and program? So just
Weatherford had a massive FCPA enforcement action, oil for food enforcement action back in the first decade of the 20th century. A gentleman named Billy Jacobson became their chief compliance officer and got them through that process. Natalia was on his team. It's Natalia Shaheda.
Gotcha. Very good. All right. Hope that worked. All right. Speak up culture and investigations. My personal favorite. Just kidding. All right. Let's walk through what they're looking for here, Tom.
Nick, I said a little bit earlier, all of these are leading to more pressure on in-house policies, procedures, and compliance professionals and external investigative counsel. In-house, you have to have a way to capture information. If someone has done something wrong, or more importantly, if someone wants to speak up, how do they do that? Do they walk into their supervisor's office? Do they send an anonymous email via the hotline? Whatever it may be, you have to have a mechanism and you have to have a culture that people trust that they will not be retaliated against. The investigative protocol of getting that information starts all of this process all the way back up to the top, which is the self-disclosure, and then number 2, the need for speed. It is put more pressure on your company internally, and we haven't even got to the external counsel yet. So having an investigative protocol, that means getting the information in, assessing that via triage, moving that information to the appropriate level within your organization, making a decision to start and get going as quickly as you can.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the ethics and compliance job is. We're trying to crowdsource this risk intelligence to de-risk our organizations, provide those insights back to the point of risk, and ultimately increase the bottom line vis-a-vis a culture of authentic integrity. So we have all these human sensors in the organization, and there's orders of magnitude more risk in your organization than you're likely getting. And to that point, I think if you can unlock that, that's going to create that flywheel and that sort of respiratory system, right? That conversation, that back and forth with the workforce, with those human sensors, that's going to allow you to target the risks that are most prevalent and make sure that you're directing your efforts toward, what's actually a fire. When you're getting, 2 or 3 reports per 100, and there's theoretically between 50 and 60 reports per 100, maybe more, in your organization, you can really lead yourself to some wrong conclusions. You're looking at the world through a bit of a pinhole, and some of the conclusions from your analysis might not be accurate. So unlocking that can really add a lot of value, or a lot of sort of fodder for an ethics and compliance team, but it also can add a lot of value in terms of the impact we can have. So let's run through Gunvor on this example, Tom, right before we wrap up here.
Sure. So one of the key, and I really like this solution, I'm going to start at the top, is the compliance committee reviews high-risk transactions. And I think that's absolutely critical and a great start for one of the ways they did this. Let me pick this middle one because this is the first FCPA enforcement action, Nick, that talked about communications policies in the context of an FCPA enforcement action. Obviously, regulated industries, we've had a wealth of enforcement actions by the Securities and Exchange Commission, CFTC, and others regarding ephemeral communications or messaging apps. Well, this is the first time the DOJ said, hey, this applies to, non-regulated industries. So you need to think about that if you're in a non-regulated industry. What's your communications policy? Are you monitoring it? Are you enforcing it? And then improve reporting and investigation process. It's absolutely mandatory, and that's what Gunvor put in place as part of their overall remediation.
So we have a whole nother section here that we're not going to be able to get to, where we're going to be where we were going to talk through some of the speeches and the takeaways from that. Guess you're going to have to get the book, huh? Or guess you're going to have to maybe win the book next week. So Tom, thank you so much. A round of applause for Tom. Tom, every time we do something together, man, you're the best. So thank you so much for joining. Hope you all can come next week to the Ethicsverse. You're going to see a lot about that this week. So please do share. Please do enter yourself into more opportunities to win one of these amazing Ethicsverse Day prize packs. And we will see you next Thursday at the coolest place to be, every Thursday at noon Eastern. Talk to you soon.